All right, so what I have open in Maya right now is a tree that's been exported from Onyx with animation, just so that you can see what you will end up with. And so if I scrub in the time slider, we can see that there is some wind animation, which is primarily affecting the leaves and the twigs. And the way that this is done is via a OBJ export. So Onyx exports a series of OBJs, and then that has to be imported into Maya. And then if I look at my scene, you'll see I don't have a million OBJs in here. And so that's just based on how I have it set up. And I have it set up via a script that was written by Max Dayan. And so he is one of our teachers at Gnomon and works full-time at Gnomon, and he's really into scripting. And so I asked him if he could give this a shot, and he wrote an awesome script to do it. And so what it does is it imports the sequence of OBJs and then creates a blend shape using in-between mode. And so if I select my leaves, which are one of these groups, you can see that I have a blend shape node on it. And so, but the script sets that all up for you. That's a lot easier than other alternatives, because if you, for example, imported 100 OBJs and keyframed the visibility, then things like motion blur wouldn't work because nothing's actually moving. And so by doing it via blend shape, it simplifies your scene, because this tree is just one tree with just one object. And then I can only have the blend shape where I need it. So you can see I don't have a blend shape node on the trunk because it's not moving. And so I really in here only have blend shape on those branches and the twigs, because those are the things that are affected by the wind. So if I go inside here and I select, let's say, the leaves, and I turn off their visibility, then you can see there is wind movement in the twigs. And so I do need to allow for that. And if I hit play, you can see I'm getting real-time playback. And so even though this tree is a 48,000 poly, well, let's get the leaves in here, a 363,000 poly leaf, you can see that I can still scrub. You know, it's not totally real time, just because that's a lot of information that it's going through. Although when I take the leaves and I hide them, I actually do get real-time playback. So in the end, obviously, you have to play blast if you want to see it in real time with the leaves. And then I do also have a quick time, just so we can see that this renders without a problem. And so in here, I can see that I've got you know, a simple shader for the leaves already set up. Rendering is stuff we'll talk about later. But anyway, it works. So how do you do it? So the tree that I'm using in here, we can see, is mahogany. It's one of the presets from Onyx. And I also, when I export it, I put some numbers inside the name. And that's just to remind me what the wind parameter settings were that I used. And so that's just handy if I want to go in and just later on make a tree with similar behavior. I kind of like to notate that. So the process to do this, if we go over to Onyx, and so let's say we want to find that mahogany tree. In the broadleaf library, that one is under the Bro Trees 7, which is just another collection of a bunch of cool trees. And so if I hit M, that takes me to mahogany. So I'll open it, hit the little helix. So that draws in. And by default in here, there is no wind on. So if I choose that I want to have some wind, I hit that little button. And if I hit the helix, now it's going to draw the tree with the wind affecting it. But like I've said, I can't hit play and get real-time performance. So I need to hit the wind properties button and in here make some changes. Now, under properties, all of these sliders have to do with how wind affects the trunk versus the bough and so forth. And so you can basically affect, control the stiffness, let's say, of each of those individually. And so the specific, names of each of these are in the manual. And the manual for Onyx is really small and really easy to go through. So I'm not going to sort of explain all of this stuff. But if we go and just sort of leave it at default for the properties, which is generally fine. The main thing I'm interested in is the wind and the gust parameters. And you'll see that the speed right now is set to 11 kilometers per hour, 20% change, 50% direction change. And in here, I can go and change the direction that the wind is moving. So I'm just going to have the wind move to the right, which is a default, but that's fine for what we're doing. And so let's say I go and if I went back to Maya and I looked at this tree, you can see I have it at 750/70. So what that means is I had this set to 750 and 70. So meaning 7 kilometers per hour, 50% speed change, and 70% directional change over time. So it's just not this constant wind. The wind gets stronger and slower and changes direction up to 70%. So that worked out fine for that tree. And then I also had a gust in there. So you'll see if I go back to Maya, I have the gust set to 4. So if I go back to Onyx, meaning that the speed on my gust was just 4 kilometers per hour, because that gets added to the speed you have here. So this means that I have a, 7 kilometer per hour wind that can change based on this gust up to 4 miles an hour, which means 7 plus 4 is 11. And then it has a 20% speed change. It begins at frame 20. The gust lasts for 15 frames. Duration change, rise, how many frames it takes for it to pick up or reach its top speed. A lot of sort of intuitive stuff, 30 frames between gusts and so forth. So let's say we're happy with that and we just want to sort of see what we got. So if I hit OK, like I said, I can't really, hit play in here and expect to get any kind of decent playback. So if I stop and rewind, let's say to the beginning, to frame 1, I can see that there's a little bit of bend on this branch right there, but it's kind of difficult to preview. And so you just kind of, in the end, ignore this stuff down here and export it. So to export this tree, I now need to go back to File, Save Model as OBJ. If I hit Count, and give it a second, it's 214,000 polys. And you can see it's not exporting the twigs, because twigs are invisible. So if I hit Close, I'll be able to see in here that some of my leaves, if I were to zoom in, are probably floating in air. So, like in there, for example. And so, although there are a lot of leaves. So, if I choose to turn the twigs on, then I can see that now all of my leaves are being connected to the tree. So as far as the stems go, like I said, I might want to go to stem length and again put that to 0. So I don't need the stems. I could also put the twig length to 0 if I don't want to export the twigs, because those do add a lot of polygons. So also, while you're testing, if you want things to be a little bit faster, you could always go in and reduce the number of leaves inside here or reduce the number of twigs. So if we look at our tree and all of the twigs that are on it, and I go to my little branches button, you'll see that my twig density is set to 15 centimeters, which means there's 15 centimeters between each twig. If I double that to 30, we're going to get far fewer twigs, and you're going to see it's going to draw faster. And so since the leaves grow off the twigs, you're also going to get fewer leaves. And so it's just going to become a lighter tree. So for testing purposes, when you're trying to find your wind settings, you don't necessarily need to export a super heavy tree, because it's going to take a lot longer to export. So if I also want to reduce the number of leaves, aside from changing twig density, I can go to leaves, and you'll see you have leaf density. So there's 5 centimeters between each leaf. So if I put that to 10, then there's more space between the leaves inside here. So I can do this for a lot of these settings. So if I go to my branches, branch density, you'll see you have density for B1, B2, and B3. So my branch 1 density is set to 30. So if I put that to 50, we're going to get more space between B1 branches. So, or if I go to my bow density, there's 10 centimeters between each of these main branches off of the trunk. So if I put that to a higher number, we'll get fewer of those main branches. So you can see all of this stuff is just lowering the resolution of the tree while keeping the exact same style of tree. So it looks exactly the same, it's the same species, it just has fewer branches, fewer twigs, and fewer leaves. And it just is lower res. So if I now go to save model as OBJ, I've now cut my polygon count in half, even with the twigs on. And then if I take the twigs and make them polyline, I'm now only at 80,000 polys. So it's just something that's a good idea. So for final output, I might bump all my densities up a little bit so I get more branches and more twigs and more leaves, but I think you get the idea of what I'm talking about. So in here now, what do I need to do to export animation? Well, first, for my leaves, again, you have to decide if you want resolution. At least have number of P objects to 1. Remember, that's really important so that you get UVs on your leaves. So in here, I'm going to have this resolution 1 P object. And then for my leaves, I want them to be, square. So I'll make them around 60 by 60. And I can go in here and, mess with some of the settings. Hit OK. I now have 116,000 polygons for this tree. And now I want to export animation. So there's two things. One is you have sequence export. So you obviously turn that on. And for just testing your wind settings, obviously you want to export a very, very small range. And so if you're working at 24 frames per second, which I am, then we might decide, okay, well, maybe I only need 2 seconds worth to be able to evaluate the wind. So I would export 1 to 48. So if I want more than that, let's say we go to 72. So let's do 3 seconds of animation. So this means it's going to export 72 OBJs of this tree. And then for the technique that I'm using via blend shape, in order for blend shape to work so that it can morph between each of these different tree states into each other, it is critical that you turn on fixed segments. And so that just makes sure that each time it exports the OBJ, every single piece of the tree has the exact same poly count. That's just a very important thing for blend shape. So when you turn on fixed segments, you're going to end up with a unified or consistent polygon count for every single OBJ export. So right now it's set to fixed segments at 10 centimeters between each segment. So think about segments with pane effects. And you could obviously lower that number to increase resolution, but our resolution settings are all kind of set up here. I can still choose to have, more resolution on my trunk and, have the branch 1 be at 4, and this is going to increase my poly count, and that's all fine. But as long as my P objects are set to 1 for the leaf, fixed segment is on, and sequence export is on, I'm good to go. So I'm going to export 72 frames for this tree at 24 frames per second. And then I'll just use the default naming conventions with the frame extension padding at the end of the name. So let's hit save. I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this Mahogany. And so in here for this, I'm using similar settings to what we had in Maya. And so again, the settings were 750, 70 with a gust of 4. So I might choose to call this folder Mahogany 750, 70 gust 4. And if we look inside here, you'll see that I've got a bunch of things like that just for myself, just so that I can remember, if I ever import what that tree is, what its behavior is going to be. So like this one has a speed of, 15 kilometers per hour. So that's going to be moving in the wind a lot faster with a very, very high speed gust. So yeah. All right. So this is where I want to put it. And so here it's just using a name because I clicked on a file name. So Mahogany. And I could also put that in the file name as well, 50, 70, gust 4. And so if I go and choose that as my name, so Mahogany 50, 70, hit save. Now it's going to start exporting. So you'll see export status it's on frame 4 now, frame 5, so it's moving along. It's going to get to frame 72 relatively quickly. So it's taking around a second per frame export. So this is going to take about a minute. So if you have a tree that's really heavy, meaning you have a 500,000 polygon tree, then it could take 4 seconds per frame. And if you have a 120 frame sequence that you need, then you're talking about potentially 10 minutes to export your tree from Onyx. So if you're just testing your win settings, you don't want to spend 10 minutes exporting just to get this into Maya and decide that the win settings are wrong. So in the end, that's why it's a really good idea to lower the resolution of your tree down to something that allows you to get it exported in a reasonable amount of time. So I'm just going to let this finish exporting, and then we'll take a look at what to do with the results. All right, so that exported, and I just navigated to the directory where we put it, and we'll see that we have 72 frames of OBJs, and it did include a material file for each one, which we don't really care about. We just want the OBJs. So you can see it's about 50 megs for each one. So, it gets kind of big, but it's fine, it works. So how do we get this OBJ sequence into Maya? And so I did a bit of searching around when I needed to do this, and couldn't really find any scripts that did it the way I wanted. And so, like I mentioned, Max Damon was able to write something that works great. And so I'm going to include his script on the DVD. So that'll just be in a scripts directory. And so if I just minimize this for a second, this is the script. So it's md blend from obj. And so just take that script and put it in your scripts directory and restart Maya. And so just under, users, Maya, whatever version of Maya you're using, and in there will be a directory called scripts. Stick it in there, restart Maya, and then you can just put the command on a shelf, and if you want, you can assign this icon to it. You don't have to. But if I go into Maya now, you'll see that I have a button on the shelf which has this command. So once you've installed the script, put it in your scripts directory, restarted Maya, this is what you type on the command line, md blend from obj, and just pay attention because it's case sensitive. And I assigned his little icon to it. So what we do to get it to work is, let's go in here and I'll just hide this tree. And we just click that button. So you don't have to make a button on the shelf, but it's obviously convenient. So if I click that button, you're going to get a dialog that's asking you for a directory of where your OBJ sequence is. So I'm going to navigate to where I have it. So models, Onyx, and it is, I believe, B is the one we exported. I think. Let me check. Yeah, B. Okay. So we're going to select B. And once you select the folder, then just click Select Folder. And then it's a process of waiting. And so what it's going to do is it's going to start importing every single frame of that OBJ. So this is going to take a little while, but you'll notice that the polygon count in the upper left corner in my HUD is increasing. So one at a time, it's importing each OBJ, and then when it's done, it will do a blend shape between all of the OBJs per element. So for the trunk and the bow and branch 1, branch 2, branch 3, twigs and leaves, will each get their own blend shape node. And so that's convenient because then it allows you to delete blend shapes you don't need. So if you know that the bow and branch 1 and the trunk aren't moving at all in the wind, you can remove the blend shape animation from them just to reduce scene file size. It'll reduce the size down a little bit, because basically blend shape needs to store a state for every single frame of the animation. And so when you use this method of OBJ sequences from Onyx, you definitely are going to get larger scene files. That's just the nature of the beast. It works fine. You saw the performance that I was able to scrub. It renders fine. It just means your scene files get a little bigger. So not a big deal. It's just have a big hard drive. So I'm going to let this finish importing, and then when it's done, I'll show you what it created. All right, so the script just finished. So as it was importing, the polygon count just went higher and higher and higher, and then finally it creates a blend shape between all of the nodes and deletes all of the targets and just leaves you with this. So you just have a single node for each of your elements, and as you will see, if I scrub on the time slider, we have our wind animation. So very, very cool and really, really simple. And so really the only thing about exporting animation from Onyx to Maya is patience, because you have to wait, obviously, for the process of exporting and then wait for the process of importing, but it works. So inside here, something like the trunk, for example, has a blend shape node on it. But the blend shape node is kind of irrelevant because the trunk doesn't move in the wind. So some of these blend shape nodes I can remove. Although another thing I should point out is that my tree animation was 72 frames long. And so what the script also does is that it takes all of the copies of the tree. So let's say all of the copies of this bough branch right there, and it does a blend shape. But under animation mode, if you go to create blend shape and go to the options, there's a checkbox called in between, and that's what it's using. So it allows you to select, 72 OBJs, create a blend shape, and then it just does an in between all 72, so that as your blend shape slider goes from 0 to 1, your geometry goes through all 72 of those targets. And so the script also automatically sets a keyframe on the blend shape node. So you'll see here's the blend shapes attribute. So if I go to my leaves and I click on blend shape, at frame 1 you can see there's a keyframe. And if I go to frame 72, there's a keyframe. I can just see it on the time slider. So you can see that blend shape slider, if I click on it, middle mouse button drag, I can actually manually just change the value of that blend shape slider. And so, but it is pre-keyframed. So you could obviously speed up the animation. So if you wanted the wind to move faster, you could just take this tick on the time slider and move it to the left. But you couldn't slow it down, because if you slowed it down, it would have to hold each state of the blend shape target. And blend shape is a linear deformer. So it goes from OBJ1 to OBJ2 to OBJ3. Each vertex travels in a straight line to the next target. And so if I took these keys and moved them to 300, I wouldn't automatically get a 300 frame animation. I would, but it would look wrong because each vertex would be moving in a straight line to each target. The point is, it'll look bad, don't do it. So you can make it go faster, but you can't make it go slower. So there's definitely animation on that blend shape node, as we can see, but for something like the bow, I don't need it. So if I go inside here and I decide, well, I don't need the blend shape node on the trunk, that's called blend shape 6. So in the outliner, I can go to DAG objects only, and in here I will see there's blend shape 6, which is affecting that object. So I could just delete it from the scene. So if I go in here and be like, well, are those moving in the wind? No, doesn't look like it. So the bow has blend shape 1. So I'll grab blend shape 1, delete that. So this is just going to make your scene file a little bit smaller. Branch 1, does that move in the wind? No. So grab branch 1, that's blend shape 2, and delete blend shape 2. So now I have a blend shape still on branch 2. Is branch 2 moving in the wind? Yes, a little bit. If I look right there, the upper right corner of the tree, I can see that highlighted branch has a little bit of movement on it, so I'll keep the blend shape node on it. DAG objects only, and there you go. So now I've got tree animation. And so also you'll notice inside here that the leaves are moving in the wind, and then all of a sudden they all kind of get dark. That's just because they're changing directions. And that's the gust coming in. So the gust is hitting us around frame 30. And if we go in here and we look at our wind parameters, you can see that the gust begins at frame 20 and takes 7 frames to rise. And so that's around frame 30 that you would expect to notice that gust hitting. And so that's just causing all the leaves to suddenly go in a different direction. It's just a gust of wind. So that is how you export animation from Onyx to Maya. And so thanks to Max for making that script and making the process really, really intuitive and simple. And so the highlights again, after you've set your wind parameters, is to go to Save Model as OBJ, and then turn on Sequence Export, decide the frame range you need for your animation, set your frame rate, and then very importantly, turn on fixed segments. So Max's script will not work without that on because it uses blend shape. And then, of course, having your number of P objects set to at least a value of 1 so you get UVs on your leaves. So let's go back to Maya. And so in here, as far as previewing the animation, as I've mentioned, if I hit play, it's not going to play back at real time. And so you would, of course, just choose to do a play blast. And so it's kind of getting cut off, but I'm going to go down to play blast, go to the options. I can say from my window size, full size of the window, format if, encoding Maya, play blast. Now it'll buffer all of those frames in. And then when it's done, it'll open it in FCheck so I can see it in real time. And so there is my wind animation. And it looks fine. So sometimes I've noticed that when I export wind animation from Onyx, you might get, a leaf or two that's bugging out. So like everything looks really nice in here. But if I look on the left, I can see like there's 1 or 2 leaves that are really freaking out in the wind. If you don't like those, just delete them. It's just a polygon. So just keep that in mind. So meaning I can now scrub in here and be like, yeah, that leaf that's right there, I just want to go and grab those polys, shift angled bracket just to make sure I have all of the polys of that leaf, and then I can just hit delete. So, and then everything in here still works. I just don't have that leaf anymore. What else? I think that is it. Yeah. So that is how to basically export stuff out of Onyx. So we've looked at how to do a single model, how to make decisions on all the settings we have inside here for resolution. Sometimes you want things to be polyline, making sure you specify your plates for your leaves, and that's it. So the next thing we're going to look at is obviously we're going to be looking at a bunch of different trees with Onyx from the library, and we'll be talking about materials and shading and scene setup. We'll set up a couple different scenes, and we have some other Onyx programs to look at, but we still have a couple things that we want to do with Onyx Broadleaf. But the first example that I'm going to show you is another quick way to do animation with Onyx trees, just depending on the resolution you need. So I found that if you have a hero tree that's near camera, doing proper leaf animation with wind via Onyx is going to be your best solution for something to be realistic. But if your trees are midground or background, there is another way that I came up with that is really quick to set up, plays back really fast, and you can do it in Maya. And so it involves using dynamic soft body lattices on your leaves. And if you do it that way, you'll be able to get leaf animation or tree animation, or rather wind animation, with a smaller footprint in scene size, quick setup, and really fast performance. So it just depends on what look you're going for. So this isn't a technique I'm going to show you for hero trees that are up close to camera, but for mid and background it works pretty well. So we're going to jump to Maya for a bit to look at that example. And then we'll get back to Onyx and start browsing the broadleaf library a little bit more. So, but let's jump over to Maya for a sec.